This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hi Talia.
Hey Tanya.
How are you?
Oh, today's a good day.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Woo! I have a regular episode today that I can't wait to tell you guys about.
Oh, I'm excited.
I know. And before I do, please hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. And I'm going to tell you a story about these two asswads.
Oh, what? That threw me off.
I know.
Okay.
So our story begins in the summer of 1973 when 28-year-old Willie Steelman met 22-year-old Doug Gretzler. Willie had moved from California to Denver, Colorado, where Doug was already living. Willie went to Denver to visit his sister Frances and decided to stay a while, much to her dismay because he didn't contribute toward the household and he refused to get a job, so he was just kind of like freeloading. Doug, on the other hand, was a bit of a drifter, and he had just kind of been roaming around the country trying to find work to support his drug habit. He met Willie at Frances's house through a mutual acquaintance. Now, these guys knew 17-year-old Marcia Renslow.
Okay.
Not sure why. But Marcia had asked them if they would steal some motorcycle parts for her.
Okay.
And Willie and Doug became good friends and often talked about committing various crimes, usually property crimes, in order to get fast money. As part of this genius plan, Willie taught Doug how to be a purse snatcher.
A purse snatcher.
Mm-hmm. So these two numbnuts get together, and in the fall of 1973, they decide they're going to head to Arizona for a change of scenery. Marcia asked if she could go with them because she knew someone, a woman, and I've seen her listed as either 18 years old or 21 years old, but her name was Catherine Messites, whom she had a crush on. Marcia had a crush on Catherine.
Okay. Little twist.
Yes, but Catherine didn't know. So the road trip began on October 9th. And by the 13th, they were in the town of Globe, Arizona. There, Willie robbed a nude sunbathing couple at gunpoint.
What?
And this netted a whole $5. I know. As they drove to Tempe, they picked up a hitchhiker and drove him to an orange grove where they robbed him, as well as pistol whipped him. One of the items they stole was a ring, which they promptly pawned for $60. That night, the trio spent overnight in a motel and decided to seek out Catherine, and who she moved to Arizona with. It was a guy named Kenneth. The next day, when they got to the address that Marcia had for Catherine, Kenneth was living there, and he told them they had broken up and Catherine had moved out, and she now lived with a man named Robert Robbins, and he gave him the address.
Okay.
The following day, October 14th, Willie, Doug, and Marcia head to the address that Kenneth had given them. However, when they got there, they discovered the address was incorrect. Oops. And in Kenneth's defense, it's not known whether he gave them the wrong address on accident or on purpose. However, it doesn't change the fact that Willie and Doug were super pissed. You know, they're looking for Catherine. A couple days later, on October 17th, Willie and Doug arrived back at Kenneth's house. Kenneth was home with a friend of his, 19-year-old Michael Adshade. Willie and Doug held Kenneth and Michael at gunpoint and forced them to drive to Catherine's apartment. Because he's like, and I don't know if he just like wrote it down wrong.
Right. But maybe he knows how to get there.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Just doesn't know the exact address.
Right. So when they got there, everyone started drinking and smoking.
It's a party.
Yeah.
No, he was just held at gunpoint.
Exactly. I know. Sometimes there's people held at gunpoint in the story, and I'm like, and nothing quite happens. So I'm just so like, strange. So weird.
That's a party.
Yes. So they're drinking and smoking some weed, and so everyone's either high or drunk, or both. And because of this, Michael and Kenneth were able to sneak out of Catherine's apartment, and they headed back to Kenneth's home. Again, I'm like, okay, if somebody held me at gunpoint, I don't know if I would go right back to my house, but maybe because they were all drunk and drinking, like everything was forgiven. I have no idea.
Oh, so they took Kenneth back, too. Okay.
No, Kenneth and Michael left.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Left Doug and Willie behind.
Hey.
Yeah.
Why not?
And during this time, I'll note that Marcia was staying with Catherine at her apartment that she shared with Robert. So she was there to join the party.
So just a big party.
After Michael and Kenneth left, Catherine told everyone the reason why she had left Kenneth, and it was because he had thrown her through a glass door.
Oh, shit.
I know, after a really heated argument they had, and it was about her bringing one of her clients into their bedroom.
What kind of clients?
Well, she was a masseuse and sometimes sex worker.
Okay.
And during this melee, she had cut her hand.
What?
Yeah, it's so bizarre. Once the party winded down, Robert took Willie and Doug back to their motel, and Marcia stayed with Catherine and him for several more days. It's believed that Marcia never told Catherine how she felt about her and just instead enjoyed her company. After several days passed and Catherine didn't hear from Willie or Doug, she bought Marcia a plane ticket to go back home to Denver. Because remember, she drove with Willie and Doug. The day after the party at Catherine's trailer, Willie and Doug decide to go back to Kenneth's apartment. I don't know why, but once they got there, they decided to force Kenneth and Michael into Kenneth's Volkswagen. He had a Volkswagen van at gunpoint again, and Willie announced to them they were going to drive to California.
Why?
I don't know, because it's the 70s, dude, and who fucking knows? As they drove for a few hours, Doug and Willie took turns driving and pointing the gun at Michael and Kenneth. The kidnapped pair were not bound, and they were able to freely sit in the back of the van. After driving for a few hours, they all arrived to a spot near Little John Creek in Knights Ferry, California. The van was parked, and Michael and Kenneth were ordered out of the van and to walk down to the creek bed. As they walked, one of the men asked, "What's going to happen, man?" When they got to the creek bed, Kenneth and Michael were tied up with a microphone cord and rope, and Willie told them they were going to just leave them and that they needed to wait an hour before they tried to escape and leave the creek bed. Whether this was really the plan or not, whether Willie had intended to let them free, no one knows, because he then started to strangle Kenneth and stab him to death.
Yeah, I don't think that was the plan.
Yeah, me either.
Leave him there.
Doug was doing the same to Michael, and after he had killed Kenneth, Willie went over to where Doug and Michael were, and he helped Doug murder Michael. After both men were dead, Doug and Willie stripped their victims naked and hid their bodies under some nearby bushes.
Why strip them naked?
I don't know. Take their clothes?
Okay.
That's the only thing I could think of. And with the murders of Michael and Kenneth, this was the beginning of Doug and Willie's 17-day killing spree.
Oh, shit.
That ended with 17 people dead, including some children.
How have I never heard of this?
I know, it's crazy. This is a crazy story. The following week after killing Kenneth and Michael, Doug and Willie encounter a couple in Petaluma, California on October 20th. This couple was James Fulkerson and Eileen Hollock, and they were ordered to drive Willie and Doug to Santa Clara. But along the route, our pair of dickheads told their hostages to stop, and they bounded James and put a gun to his head. James, obviously terrified and concerned about Eileen, said, quote, "I know I don't have much to say in this, but please don't hurt Eileen, okay? Please don't hurt her." For some reason, this really pissed off Willie.
I don't think it takes much to piss off Willie.
I don't either. And so he untied James, pulled him to his feet, and growled at him, saying he had every intention of, quote, blowing your fucking head off.
Oh, shit.
They put James in the trunk of his car, and Willie tried to rape Eileen but couldn't maintain an erection. James and Eileen's kidnapping soon ended when the next day, Willie and Doug robbed them and released them in Mountain View, California. And then they stole a car from a parking lot. So, phew, Eileen and James managed to escape with their lives.
Wonder why they released them.
I know. At this point in our story, Willie and Doug were starting to get really paranoid that Catherine and Robert would be able to connect the dots and realize that maybe they were involved in Kenneth and Michael's disappearances, because at this point, their bodies hadn't been found. They were just missing persons. So they decided to head back to Arizona. As they drove back through Phoenix, they picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Logren.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, near Monterey Bay, California. And he said he was heading their way. So once they get to Arizona, they stop by Catherine's home, and they found out that Marcia had flown back to Denver. Stephen was with them for this visit, and Tweedledee and Tweedledum introduced them.
You've got such great names for them.
Thank you. He introduced them as a friend of theirs. They didn't say, oh, we just picked up this guy. He's just one of our friends. Being the 70s, a party broke out. Everyone started drinking and taking various drugs. Catherine talked about her interests in astrology, white magic, and reincarnation. And Steve talked about, and Steve's the hitchhiker, if you remember.
Right.
He talked about one of his favorite subjects, which was sports. This all got under Willie's skin, like you said. It doesn't take much.
Nothing.
He just irritated at fucking everything, right? I mean, I kind of understand. I get irritated a lot.
Yeah, but
I'm not going to kill anybody. So he's all irritated and his attitude grew surly. They party into the night, and the next afternoon, when Robert drove Catherine to her job, and again, I don't know if she was a masseuse/sex worker, one or the other, probably a combo, right? Willie started an argument with hitchhiker Steve. It grew heated. However, Willie backed down when the physically stronger Steve, who was about 6'1" and 180 pounds, confronted him. Losing the battle, Willie retrieved his shotgun and a sleeping bag from the car and ordered Steve out of Catherine's apartment at gunpoint and into the car. Doug joined them, and they drove to a gully near the Superstition Mountains, which is in Arizona. They stopped, and Willie ordered Steve out of the car.
That's not good.
No, it's not. Once he was out of the car, Willie robbed Steve of his wallet and demanded he get inside the sleeping bag. Once he was inside the sleeping bag, Willie shot Steve in the head and left his body where it lay. Doug and Willie then returned to Catherine's trailer on October 24th. Instead of heading to California as they had originally decided, they had murder on their minds and Robert would be their next intended victim. They wanted to kill Robert not only because they were afraid he would connect them to Michael and Kenneth's disappearance, but they also didn't like that he seemed subservient in his relationship with Catherine. Not that it's any of their business.
Yeah, I don't even understand.
I know. What do you care? The plan was that they would kill Robert while Catherine was at work. After Catherine went to work, Doug strangled Robert from behind with an electrical cord. Robert then took a bullet to his brain, and I'm not sure which of them, Doug or Willie, was the one who pulled the trigger. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, it doesn't.
After killing him, Willie and Doug hid his body under his mattress in his bedroom.
Under his mattress in his bedroom. Mm-hmm. Okay.
When Catherine got off of work, Willie picked her up and drove her home, telling her that Robert had left town and would be back in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what happened to him. He just left. The next morning, so does Catherine not sleep in the bedroom?
I don't know.
The next morning, Willie, Catherine, and Doug went to the store. And during their conversation that they had, Catherine said something about being glad that Ken and Bob, so Kenneth and Robert, were out of her life. So, like I said, I don't know if she had a feeling they were dead or what. She also mentioned wanting to do some coke before conducting a seance that she wanted to do to help her figure out her future.
Okay.
Doug and Willie really wanted to get Catherine out of the apartment so they could dispose of Robert's body, so Willie tried to convince Catherine to go to work at the massage parlor. She didn't want to go to work, though, so Willie ended up shooting her in the head from behind.
Why?
Yes.
Why?
As she was kneeling down to perform her seance at an altar she had made.
Oh.
I know.
What?
I don't know if they intended to always kill her, but Catherine and Robert's bodies wouldn't be found for 2 more days on October 28th, after their friends and family grew concerned that no one had heard from them in a couple days. Well, I think their real motive, was they were afraid, obviously, Catherine and Robert would know, tie them to the disappearance.
So they're just going to kill all the witnesses.
Right. So I don't know if they ever really intended to let her go.
Probably not with what's-his-face under the mattress.
Exactly. So I think it was just a matter of time before they killed her. After their bodies were discovered, police interviewed neighbors who told them about Doug and Willie and Marcia from Denver. Police tracked Marcia down first, and initially she refused to tell them anything. It wasn't until she was shown a photo of Catherine and Robert's bodies after they were left for a couple of days in the apartment.
Oh.
Yeah, she knew Willie's last name was Steelman and thought that Doug's last name was Gretzler, but it's really Gretzler, but she was close.
Close enough.
In addition to telling the cops their names, Marcia told them about robberies and carjackings they had committed and how they paid for motel rooms with stolen money while she was with them from October 9th through the 16th. On November 1st, arrest warrants were issued for Willie and Doug. That same day, after interviewing Marcia again, Arizona police received a teletype from California stating they had traced the car to the October 20th kidnapping and robbery of James and Eileen, who, if you remember, they had let them go.
Okay.
After killing Catherine and Robert on October 26th, Willie and Doug headed for Tucson. Initially, they started their journey using Robert's stolen Chevrolet vehicle. However, they soon abandoned it and got on a Greyhound bus, using money stolen from their victims to buy the tickets. They arrived in Tucson the next day on October 27th, 4 days before their arrest warrants were issued. They checked into a boarding house that evening and stayed there, laying low until November 1st. During their stay, they became acquainted with the landlady's younger sister named Joanne McPeak.
Oh, geez. Now there's another person in this.
Girl, there's so many people. That same day, Willie and Doug, being the criminals they are, couldn't stop themselves from doing some more crime. They needed a car, and they were antsy to get out of Tucson. They wanted to steal a car, but they weren't presented with any opportunity to do so, so they started hitchhiking. Soon, a Dodge Charger stopped and picked them up. Unfortunately for the driver, 19-year-old Gilbert Rodriguez Sierra, this would be his fatal mistake. As Willie and Doug got into the car, Willie pulled a gun on him and told him they were stealing his car. At gunpoint, they forced Gilbert into the trunk of his own car.
Oh, that's scary.
I know. And with Gilbert securely in the trunk, Doug and Willie go back to the boarding house to pick up Joanne McPeak and her boyfriend, Michael Marsh. I'll call him Marsh. Their mission was to buy drugs, and while the four were together, Willie told Joanne and Marsh that they had a guy in the trunk, and they called him a narc.
Okay.
Joanne, of course, didn't believe him. So Willie found Gilbert's ID in the glove box and yelled out toward the trunk, quote, "Hey, your name Gilbert?" End quote.
Oh.
Gilbert answered in the affirmative. Astonished, Joanne just stared when Willie then asked Marcia for directions to the desert because he was, quote, "gonna kill this son of a bitch," end quote.
And all the guy was doing was just driving.
I know, and being nice, right?
That's why we're not nice.
No. Fuck people. No, I'm just kidding. And before I tell you what happens next, we're going to take a break. So we have this foursome. It's Willie and Doug and Joanne and her boyfriend, Marsh.
Okay.
And they've got Gilbert. So once this foursome, plus Gilbert, arrive to Gates Pass, which is along the Tucson Mountains, Willie parks the car and drags Gilbert out of the trunk at gunpoint. He made Gilbert hand over the t-shirt he was wearing and forced him to his knees. While he was kneeling, Willie tried to shoot Gilbert twice, but the gun misfired both times, probably due to the fact that Willie had covered the gun with Gilbert's t-shirt. So Gilbert used this as an opportunity to run for his life. However, Willie ended up shooting him in the back. Gilbert then fell to his knees, collapsing into an aputina cactus. Sorry, I'm sure I mispronounced
I
it.
have no idea.
Then he fell down a small ravine. Willie ran over to where Gilbert was laying and shot him again in the face and temple at close range, while Doug was laughing about it. This was all done in front of Joanne and Marsh. After killing Gilbert, the four went back to Tucson and bought some meth and spent the night doing drugs.
Party.
I know. The next day, Doug and Willie wiped down Gilbert's car for their fingerprints and abandoned it in a parking lot. Gilbert's body was found about 12 hours after he was killed. A few days pass, and Willie and Doug end up in the general vicinity of the University of Arizona in Tucson. And I did not read anything that they killed Joanne and Marsh, so apparently they just
let him go.
let him go.
Okay.
On Euclid Avenue between Grant and Speedway, on November 3rd, Willie and Doug were picked up by a guy named Vincent Armstrong. He was a former Tucson police officer who was then a student at the University of Arizona. Willie climbed in the back of Vincent's 1969 Firebird, and Doug got into the front on the passenger side.
Why are they picking up all these people?
I think they were hitchhiking again, and Vincent picked them up.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Once the car began to move, Willie thrust a gun into Vincent's ribs.
Poor Vincent.
I know, and he told him to drive north toward the desert. Vincent acted really frightened, and I'm sure he was frightened, by the way.
I think he was.
But maybe he had some magic way to cool himself down being a police officer. I don't know. But He told them, I'm just way too nervous. I can't drive. On Willie's direction, Vincent pulled the car over into a church parking lot and crawled over the console while Doug walked around to the driver's side. Once the car began to move again and had reached about 30 or 35 miles an hour, Vincent dove out of the car. He rolled over on the ground, picked himself up, and began running in the direction opposite the one taken by the car. He managed to escape.
Yay!
Yay! And he told the police what happened. Willie and Doug were next seen by James Nelson, who was a sales manager of the Villa Paraiso condominiums. That's in Arizona. I believe It's in Tucson. Who saw them in the Firebird driving slowly down the street as though they were looking for an address. James later saw them on the grounds of the complex and assumed that they were workmen working on the still incomplete complex. James encountered them again as he completed his daily inspection tour. This time they asked him where the Sandbergs lived.
Who's the Sandbergs?
The Sandbergs were a couple that lived in one of the 4 or 5 occupied units of the complex. So James said, they live in that condo. And they don't know the Sandbergs, by the way. And I don't know if they saw their names on a mailbox or something. But rather than going to the Sandberg home initially, Willie and Doug accosted a man they saw in the parking lot who was washing his car. Just so happens the man was Michael Sandberg, whose home they had inquired about.
That's a weird coincidence.
I know, it was a very weird coincidence. After Willie displayed a gun that he was carrying, Michael led the way back to his condominium. On the way, they again encountered James, who greeted Michael warmly. Michael made very little, if any, reply, which James knew was completely out of character for Michael, who was generally outgoing and cheerful. The 3 men went into the Sandberg condominium, where Michael's wife Pat was studying. Willie and Doug first set about to change their appearance. With Pat's assistance, I'm sure this is all by gunpoint too, by the way, Doug dyed his hair a darker shade. Willie shaved his mustache and redid his hair. Willie and Doug exchanged their grubby jeans and t-shirts for Michael's slacks and sport coats. The Sandbergs were then tied up with some twine found in their condo. They were also gagged. The couple was then put in the bathroom while Willie and Doug finished their other preparations to leave. After about an hour in the bathroom, Pat apparently became upset and was given some of her own Valium to calm her down. I would be fucking hysterical too.
Hell yeah, hand me that Valium, please.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take the bottle.
Yeah, seriously. Willie untied her and had her sit in the living room so she could answer the door if anyone came. He then went down to the car, and I think he heard some commotion outside because he then went down to the car to see if anyone was there, and he had Pat go with him. So that way, if they ran into anybody, be like, this is my brother. That was the big plan.
Okay.
Michael was moved to the bedroom, and his feet were bound with a twine running back up to his neck, which was also bound with twine.
So it's like hog-tied-ish.
Yeah, kind of, right? I don't know if it was tied in the front or the back. It doesn't really matter. At about 6 p.m., when it was dark, and they were certain that the sales manager had left, Pat was again tied with the twine. Though this time her feet were also bound. Doug went into the bedroom and shot Michael once in the head, covering the gun with a pillow so there was no noise. He then returned to the living room, where Willie had turned Pat's face to the couch so she couldn't see it coming. And Doug came out of the bedroom and shot her in the head. Willie wasn't satisfied, though, and he took the gun and shot her once more.
That poor couple, they didn't do anything.
I know. After the shooting, the pair wiped down the condominium as thoroughly as possible to eliminate fingerprints, gathered up the things they had decided to take with them, which included an expensive camera and other items belonging to the Sandbergs. They took the Sandbergs' car and drove back to the house, where they had arranged to meet with 3 others. One of the guys they met up with was Donald Scott, and there was 2 others, but they hadn't arrived, and Willie and Doug decided not to wait, so they left with Donald and decided they were going to go head toward California again. They told Donald the car was stolen, but not to tell anybody about it. They also didn't mention about murdering the Sandbergs.
Hope not.
So all Donald knows at this point is they stole his car. They stopped in Casa Grande, where they tried to rent a motel room with a credit card, but were unable to because the card had expired. Donald saw the name Michael Sandberg on the car that Willie tried to use. Then they went off to Stanfield, where they stopped at Vic's Highway Motel, and the rooms were paid for with an American Express card issued to Michael Sandberg. The next day, they had the car worked on at a service station in Stanfield, and they cashed a check drawn on the Sandberg account. Sometime that day, Donald, Doug, and Willie took a walk in the desert, and Willie and Doug told Donald the story that they had decided to use. Doug was driving Willie to his mother's funeral, and Donald was a hitchhiker that they had picked up along the way. Like, I don't know if this was a story they were supposed to tell the police
Okay.
if they ever got stopped, but they were like, this is what we're going to say. They also told Donald to let them know if things, quote, got to be too much, unquote, for him, because then they said we would let you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We'll let you go.
Yeah, we'll let
If
you
it
go.
gets too much.
Yeah.
No.
And I'm surprised they even went to the desert and didn't kill him at
I
that
know.
point,
I was just
right?
thinking when you said the desert.
You know, you're like, oof.
I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
Donald's minutes are numbered, but no. They have the car serviced. They get back in and they drive and they're approaching Yuma, Arizona. They pulled over into a rest area where they were subjected to a routine check by Officer Charles Wright of the Arizona Highway Patrol. Officer Wright checked Doug's driver's license and talked briefly with Willie. He then talked with Donald. Donald was given the most hassle by the officer since he was the most disreputable looking member of the group. Remember, Doug and Willie have like slacks and sport coats on.
Oh, yeah. Classy.
Yeah, they're dressed in Michael Sandberg's clothes. After asking Donald several questions, especially about his lack of gear, the officer let everyone go. Crossing into California, the threesome stopped at a small motel in Acquaintances, California, I think,
Okay.
about 27 miles from El Centro. They arrived at about 11:30 and registered with Mr. and Mrs. Francisco, who were the owner-managers of the motel. They used Michael Sandberg's American Express card again as ID for the check used to pay for the motel room. The manager saw a veteran's card which identified him as Captain Michael Sandberg. I know. Mrs. Francisco wrote the credit card number down on the back of the registration card, along with notations regarding the veteran's card, the names on the check, the address, and the phone number. She also noted the type of car and license number on the card. The next day, they continue west towards San Diego. At this point, Donald told his two companions, okay, I think it's time I skedaddle. And so they let him off the next time they stopped for gas.
All right. He's just going to go skedaddle away.
Yeah. It's weird how they decide who they're going to kill
and who they're not.
Mm-hmm. Willie and Doug let him off when they stopped in Pine Valley, California, and Donald ended up hitchhiking back to Tucson. After this, Willie and Doug kidnapped two young men and took them in their van to California, where they killed them, stripped their bodies, and placed them also in some bushes near a road.
Why?
I don't know. They later abandoned the van, got another vehicle, and drove back to Arizona. I mean, they're just back and forth, dude.
Right.
This is crazy.
They're just killing.
Yeah.
Just killing and killing.
Killing and killing. On November 6th, Willie and Doug reached Victor, California, which is about 40 miles south of Sacramento. That same night, husband and wife, Walter, he went by Wally, and Joanne Parkin were enjoying the night out together, bowling. Wally and Joanne were well known and loved in the Victor, California community. Victor was a small town. It was only about 275 people. Wally was the manager of the local grocery store, and he was a very kind man. Like people said, he once hired members of a family who were struggling to pay their bills. And he also gave credit to local farmers so they could get groceries.
Okay, this is making me sad.
Yeah, it gets worse.
I know.
I'm sorry.
I know.
Walter and Joanne had two children, 11-year-old Lisa and 9-year-old Robert, who they left at home with a babysitter. The babysitter was a neighbor of theirs, 18-year-old Deborah Earl. While she was babysitting, Deborah's parents, Wanda and Richard, who were 37 and 38 respectively, stopped by the Parkins' home to visit, and they had brought Deborah's younger brother, 15-year-old Richard, and Deborah's fiancé, 20-year-old Mark Lang.
So how many people are at this house?
So there's the children, Lisa and Robert. Then there's Deborah the babysitter, her parents, Wanda and Richard, her brother, and her fiancé. So there's 5 adults and 2 children.
Oh, man.
At some point before the Parkins arrived home, Willie and Doug broke into the home and held the 2 children and the adults at gunpoint. At some point, Wally and Joanne go home, and they encounter Willie and Doug and all these people being held at gunpoint, you know, all their friends.
God.
And Willie and Doug forced Wally to open the safe in his nearby store, and they stole between $3,000 and $4,000. At about 3 a.m., there was a house guest that was staying with Wally and Joanne. Her name was Carol Jenkins. She came home and went to bed. The home was quiet, and Carol assumed everyone had gone to bed. It was 3 a.m., right? Everyone should be in bed.
Right.
A few, yeah.
Well, depends.
Depends. A few short hours later, barely at the time the sun came up, Carol was awakened by Mark's parents, and Mark was Deborah's fiance. She was awakened by Mark's parents, who were freaking out because Mark never came home after coming by to visit Deborah. Carol walked through the home, she got to the master bedroom, and she saw a terrible sight. When she walked in the room, she saw the Parkins body, so it was Wally and Joanne. They were laying on the bed, shot through the head. Seeing this, Carol ran screaming from the bedroom, and the police were called. When the police got to the home, they went through the rest of the house, and they found 7 bodies in the walk-in closet. They found Wally and Joanne's 2 children.
Oh my God. How old were they?
They were 11 and 9.
Oh man.
Along with babysitter Deborah Earl, her parents Wanda and Richard, Deborah's fiance Mark, and her brother Richard. They had all been shot to death.
Wow, that's just a slaughter.
Slaughter, this entire family. They had all been bound with nylon cords with several knots, and they were gagged with knotted ties. And I think it was like a men's tie.
Okay.
They all had been shot in either their neck or head. Deborah had been shot 4 times. Her father had been shot 5 times. The coroner would report that a total of 25 bullets were recovered from the 9 victims, so I'm including Wally and Joanne. And some of them didn't die right away, the coroner said.
Oh, man.
It would be later discovered that Doug shot all of the adults and one of the children. Willie killed the other child while they slept. I think both kids were killed in their sleep. Willie and Doug were sought for this massacre at the Parkins house. And I don't know how exactly they were tied to this killing. Since they were strangers, they didn't know the Parkins or anybody. But eventually the police do put 2 and 2 together. And I think it's because, like, they end up finding other victims. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not like they didn't leave a big fat mess.
Right, all these people.
All on their trail here.
Yeah.
Using stolen credit cards and shit.
Exactly, the Sandbergs, and it's because the condominium manager saw Willie and Doug with the Sandbergs, and I believe that's how, they eventually get tied to this. So Willie and Doug's pictures were published in California newspapers. In addition, the San Joaquin Sheriff's Office received word from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office that the pair were wanted on robbery and homicide charges in Arizona. Warrants were later sent to Stockton, California, which is the county seat of San Joaquin County. Meanwhile, Sacramento, California authorities were tipped off that the 2 were staying in a hotel in Sacramento. And eventually Doug was arrested in a hallway of the hotel. He told officers that Willie could be found in a nearby apartment. Officers went to the apartment and set up a command post, communicating with Willie by loudspeaker. This is like a standoff. Willie was with the tenant of the apartment, a girl named Melinda. He initially refused to surrender and continued to refuse even after he was put on the air over a local radio station. Like that, I think that was probably one of his demands. The officers then fired tear gas at the dwelling, and he emerged and was finally taken into custody on the Maricopa County warrants. During the afternoon, Willie was transferred to Stockton on the San Joaquin charges. They both were arrested on November 9th. This is when that happened. And were charged with 9 counts of first-degree murder. Police were suspicious that they were involved in the 5 murders in Arizona I told you about, and also the missing persons case I told you about.
Yes.
But right now they're charged with the 9 murders that happened at the Parkins house. At the time Doug and Willie were taken into custody, the Sandberg slings were unknown to Pima County authorities. It was only after Pima County authorities were told that a car registered to Michael Sandberg had been in Willie's possession at the time of his arrest that they went to the Sandberg apartment in Tucson, where the bodies of Michael and Pat were found. Fingerprints later determined to belong to Willie and Doug were found in the apartment, so if they tried to clean up, they did a piss poor job. That same day, Pima County officers went to Stockton to question the duo. On June 6, 1974, Doug pled guilty to 9 counts of first-degree murder for the 9 California killings. A month later, judgment was pronounced in accordance with his plea, and he was sentenced to 9 concurrent life sentences. Arrest warrants were then issued in Arizona for the Sandberg's death, and he was put on trial for those crimes. A jury ended up convicting him of all charges, and he was sentenced to death for the Sandberg killings. Now, Willie, he was convicted of the 9 killings in California, and also for the Sandberg murders. The jury found him guilty, and he was also sentenced to death in Arizona.
Good.
In July of 1975. So after his conviction, Doug at first really didn't show any remorse for what had happened, and he often got into trouble, causing problems at the prison. However, by the 80s, he had finally calmed down, and he became a model inmate.
Oh, that's great.
I know. He expressed remorse, apologized to his family for the shame he brought upon them, and he wrote letters to the victims' families asking for forgiveness. In 1992, Jack Earl visited him in prison. Jack was related to babysitter Deborah, her brother, her parents. Okay. I think her parents might have been like his aunt and uncle. So he visits Doug in prison. They had many visits over the next several years, and Jack wrote a book about it called Where Sadness Breathes, The True Story of Willie Steelman and Doug Gretzler, and the 17 people they murdered in the autumn of 1973.
17 people.
Unbelievable, right?
Wow.
And that's where I got a lot of this information.
Wow.
Doug was remorseful toward Jack and told him his impending execution was justified. Like, I think Doug just finally came to terms with what he did. He was executed on June 3rd, 1998 by lethal injection, and that was witnessed by 35 people. Some of the witnesses were victims' families, and one was his younger sister, 2 close friends of his, 9 journalists, and several people involved in his arrest and apprehension. I know what his last meal was?
What? Yes.
Because we enjoy this. I don't know why. It's just a weird fascination. His last meal was 6 fried eggs, 4 strips of chewy bacon.
What's that?
Like when it's not like crisp,
Okay.
it's still chewy. You don't eat pork, do you?
No.
So yeah, so it's kind of chewy. It's just not like burned to a crisp.
Okay.
He had 2 pieces of white toast.
Sounds like something I'd give my dogs.
I know.
Chewy bacon.
Chewy bacon. Coffee and 2 classic Cokes over ice. His last words were, quote, "From the bottom of my soul, I'm so deeply sorry and have been for years for murdering Patricia and Michael Sandberg. Though I am being executed for that crime, I apologize to all 17 victims and their families." He then turned toward his sister and told her in Romanian that he loved her and his 2 grandchildren, and then said, quote, "Thank you for life's lessons learned," end quote. At the time of his execution, Doug was the longest-serving death row inmate in Arizona. So I'm going to tell you about Willie.
Yeah, what happened to Willie?
Willie was a bit of an asshole, if you
It's a
if you didn't
surprise.
think.
Okay.
Okay. His life in prison was much different than Doug's. He was a true piece of shit. He was a problem prisoner, often getting into fights with guards and other inmates, and he spent a lot of time in solitary confinement.
Ooh.
He wrote letters to people, some of whom he convinced he was innocent,
Mm-hmm.
and others he wrote to said a bunch of bullshit like he was a Jewish child raised by a Japanese family,
What?
that he had only committed his crimes due to despair at having been abandoned throughout his whole life,
Oh, that makes sense.
that he was a Vietnam veteran, that was bullshit, that both the Sandberg and Parkin families were murdered solely due to their involvement in narcotics trafficking.
Okay. No. Oh, God, I hate him.
Yes, and that he was studying to be a church minister.
Oh, stop it.
I know.
Stop this shit.
Some of these people sent him money, and that really pissed me
Yeah.
off. People are gullible, man.
Yeah.
I don't know. So he spent his time doing this crap. In 1983, he was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver and was told in 1986 he had less than 3 years to live. On the morning of August 7th, 1986, he was found slumped in his cell. He was still alive. He was taken to the hospital but died later that day. After being diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver, he often bragged to other inmates that he was going to die in prison and therefore, quote, beat the state, end quote.
Okay.
Like, I'm going to die on my own. The state's not going to be able to put me to death. When Patricia Sandberg's father, Roderick Mays, found out that Willie died from natural causes in prison, he said, quote, "It annoys me that he died of natural causes before he could be executed. He had been condemned to death at every level. I regret it's such a long, drawn-out process with so many chances of appeal that he died of natural causes before he could be executed."
Hey, he's dead.
End
So
quote. I know.
he's dead.
Whether the state did it or nature did, his ass died in 1986.
That's all that matters.
Yes, that's all that matters. So that is my horrible
Man,
story.
I never heard of any of them.
I know, right?
17 people.
I mean, you would think at least you would have heard of what happened at the Perkins house.
Because
Because that's fucked up. All these people.
It's insane.
I know. And what did they get?
And for what?
A couple $1,000s?
Wow.
I don't know. I
Many
hate
lives
stories
ruined.
Yeah, I hate stories like these.
All of our stories are like these.
Yes, they're all pissers. I know. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in.
Thank you for that story.
You're welcome. And in case you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe or follow button on whatever app you're listening to. And if you want to see some photos from this episode, you can go to our website, crimesandconsequences.com. You can find the sources I used for this episode. Also, we are on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Hardcore True Crime. And also on our website, you can find merch. You can find out information on how to join our Patreon group, which is at patreon.com/TNTcrimes. And if you join Patreon, you get extra episodes that are not released to the public. And you can also join through Apple Podcasts and get the same episodes that you would find on Patreon.
Yep.
Is there anything else?
No, you did it.
All right.
You did it, and you did it well.
Thank you. Thank you, Talia.
You're welcome.
Until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.